Okay, so that went quick. Feel free to pause the recording and go back and re-listen and flip through those previous several slides if you're confused. But now we know sort of what we're trying to reach rational agreement about. So that's the first answer to our first question. Now let's move on to our second question about premise two, which is which distributions could everyone rationally accept? Right now we're getting into the real meat of Rawls's view. Now Rawls's answer to that question is long, right? It composes premises 3 and 4. And these are what we'll be talking about for the rest of this lecture. Right, premise 3 says that everyone in society could rationally accept a distribution if and only if Rawls's contractors would all accept or agree to that distribution in Rawls's original position. And premise 4 says that Rawls's contractors would all agree to a relevant distribution in the original position if that distribution satisfies the following criteria. Principle A, each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others. And principle B, insofar as is compatible with A, social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they're both one, to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged, and two, attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality and opportunity. All right, so premises 3 and 4 answer the question posed by premise 2, and then once we have all that together, then we have Rawls's theory of justice. All right, so which distributive principles could everyone rationally accept? Well, what is it for a decision to be rational? This is something we've talked about a little bit in this course, but not too much. Now, if the rational decision is just this, it says, if it's just rational for me to accept something, if that thing is best for me, then the problem is that we'll never find principles that everyone could rationally accept, since me getting what's best for me will basically always conflict with someone else getting what's best for them. Well, why think that's true? Well, imagine that what's best for you is to be the emperor of the world. Right? Well, look, what's best for me might also be to be emperor of the world, but we can't both be emperor of the world, right? So if the rational choice is the one that's best for me no matter what, then it might be impossible to reach universal rational agreement, and so we might not be able to find principles of justice. Now, here's a question for you. Do you agree that me getting what's best for me will basically always conflict with someone else getting what's best for them? You might push back on this, but it's something that Rawls is worried about, and we probably should be worried about too. Now, there's a lot of such puzzles that we'll arrive at when we start asking these kinds of questions, but Rawls has a really, really, really neat shortcut to help us kind of work past all such deadlocks and avoid kind of going down irrelevant rabbit holes. He basically says the following. Look, the most rational decisions are those that help us achieve our goals, and they're decisions that we only make after careful reasoning based on all and only the relevant facts, where wishful thinking, bias, and so on are absent. And rational decisions, like any consensual decisions, cannot be arrived at by way of deception or coercion. Okay, but you can't just ask people to make decisions in these ways. Right? We're often convinced that we're being rational in these ways, even when we're not. So if we're trying to figure out which distributive principles everyone could actually rationally agree to, we might have to perform a little thought experiment. Okay, now this thought experiment is one of the most famous things about Rawls's view. It's a thought experiment that he calls the original position, or including the veil of ignorance. And here's the basic idea. He says, in justice as fairness, and that's what Rawls calls his view, in justice as fairness, the original position of equality corresponds to the state of nature in the traditional theory of the social contract. The original position is not, of course, thought of as an actual historical state of affairs, much less as a primitive condition of culture. It's understood as a purely hypothetical situation characterized so as to lead to a certain conception of justice. Among the essential features of this situation is that no one knows his place in society. No one knows his class position or social status, nor does anyone know his fortune in the distribution of natural assets and abilities, that is, his intelligence, strength, and the like. I shall even assume that the parties do not know their conceptions of the good or their special psychological propensities. The principles of justice, that is, are chosen behind a veil of ignorance. This ensures that no one is advantaged or disadvantaged in the choice of principles by the outcome of natural chance or the contingency of social circumstances. Since all are similarly situated, no one is able to design principles to favor his particular condition. The principles of justice are the result of a fair agreement or bargain. Okay, so those are some of the biggest ideas in Rawls' theory. Right, so the basic idea, put slightly differently, is that one way to remove bias and to make universal agreement possible is to imagine this fantastical hypothetical scenario, right, the original position, where we know some important things, lack knowledge of other important things, and then are asked to decide on principles of distribution from that position. Right? As a reminder, we talked about this in the last PowerPoint. Here's how Rawls fleshes those things out. So the people in the original position, we can call the contractors, and he imagines that these people have several characteristics. First, they're amoral, which is not to say they're bad people. They're not making decisions on the basis of their moral views because they don't know which moral views they'll actually have once they're out of the original position. So they're primarily motivated instead by self-interest, right? And that's just to be understood in the following way: they prefer to have more rather than less primary social goods. Okay, the contractors are also what Rawls calls mutually disinterested. That is, they're not envious of other people for getting a lot more stuff, but nor are they kind of concerned to make sure other people do well, right? They just want to make sure that they themselves do as well as possible in terms of primary social goods. And you're also supposed to imagine that the contractors are instrumentally rational, which means that they take effective means to their ends, whatever their ends happen to be, and their preferences are coherent. Right, so if they prefer apples to oranges, they don't also prefer oranges to apples. Right, they have a reasonable set of preferences, whatever their preferences happen to be. And then finally, importantly, they're epistemically rational. Right, they form their beliefs on the basis of evidence. Right, they can tell what constitutes good evidence, all that stuff. They don't have inconsistent beliefs. Right, so those are the conditions of the contractors. The original position imposes some additional constraints, as Rawls just talked about in that passage we just read. In the original position, the contractors have no particular information about themselves, about their society, or about other people. Right? They don't know how they are or how they will be after they leave the original position. They don't know their race or class or sex, how old they are, right? Their sexual orientation, their gender. They don't know any of that stuff. Okay. Why? So that, well, we'll see. But the people in the original position, it's not that they don't know anything. They have all general knowledge you could want, right? They know lots of stuff about human beings in general, about nature, about the social sciences, right? So all the general knowledge that you could ask for, they have. They just don't have any particular knowledge about themselves or who they'll be outside of the original position. Next, the contractors in the original position are free and equal, just in the sense that no contractors are able to dominate or coerce other contractors, right? Nobody's in a special position with respect to anybody else. They all have kind of equal say. And then finally, and this is very important, the principles that people will agree to in the original position are final, right? It's not like you go into the original position, pick some principles, try it out. If you don't like it, you get to go back into the original position to pick new principles. It's a once and for all process, right? You got to pick principles that you can live with, right? You need to be able to accept and live by those principles that you've chosen, even once you return to society and leave the original position. Now, why does Rawls think that the contractors have these features? Well, Rawls is just trying to kind of present a very minimal, uncontroversial view of what rationality consists in. Right? Rawls doesn't require that his contractors are angels, but he doesn't assume that they're devils either. Right? They're just ordinary enough people trying to do the best they can. Right? That's why he describes the contractors in these ways. Right? If you imagine that they're angels or devils, then you're going to warp. You're going to provide a you're going to end up with a very strange looking principle of justice. So that's why he wants to imagine they're kind of ordinary and rational in this uncontroversial sense. Now, why does Rawls say that the original position is like this? Well, as he says, right, these features of the original position are meant to allow the contractors to reach universal rational agreement about principles of distribution. Right? And he says that right, this is one way. If we imagine the original position in this way, then it's at least possible.